Hello, and welcome to the final episode of the Changemakers season here on the 92,000 Hours podcast. We added this bonus episode as an opportunity for our team to reflect on the learnings we had this season and to better understand the lessons that really resonated for us. I can't wait for you to meet the team. Although I do have to say that they had a chance this episode to tease me a little about how often I say weepy this season. But it can't be helped. I feel what I feel when I listen to these really impactful guests. I hope you enjoy their teasing. And speaking of guests, however, I want to thank honestly and with all of my heart our guests this season. And I want to acknowledge their willingness to bring their whole selves to these discussions. To Jim Langley, Mark Shreve, Felicia Maxfield Barrett, Kyle Vandermeulen, Gary Danes, Caitlin Brazil, Sean Tigan, Sarah DeMark, and Dale Whitaker. Thank you. Thank you. From me and all of our listeners, we learned so much from you. And now I'm excited to have my colleagues at Connection Collaborative, Lexi Banks and Sarah Doe, join me. Today, we are talking about our reflections. Super excited to have this conversation with the two of you because we're the only people who have listened to the whole entire season at this point in time because we're the end of the season. So people will be listening to us talk about it. And we haven't had an opportunity to have a reflection on a whole season in like a group conversation like this. And so I'm thrilled about it. I think it's going to be fun. I have no idea how the conversation is going to go. And I'm really interested to hear what resonated with the two of you. But before we get started on doing that, I think it would totally be worthwhile because I'm always the person on the podcast for you two to introduce yourselves and talk about what it is that you do at Connection Collaborative, what you do with the podcast, and why you would listen to 92,000 Hours, even if you didn't work here. So since the first person I can see on my screen right now is Sarah, let's start with you, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I am the director of podcast at Connection Collaborative. So I'm the person who does all the editing and mixing and uploading, etc. I would listen to 92,000 Hours even if I didn't work here. And that's because I feel like the biggest question that I've had throughout my career so far is quite literally, how do I make a job more meaningful for me? I'm in my 20s and I'm still figuring out what a good job, an aligned job looks like for me. And I've had plenty of misaligned jobs. And I think that had I found this podcast sooner, it would have been a great resource for me during those crazy times.
Awesome. I love that. All right, Lexi, your turn.
Hey, my name is Lexi. I'm the marketing director for Connection Collaborative. For the podcast, that means that I'm doing all of our social media promotion, and I also edit the video for YouTube. If anyone's watching the video, hope you are. And for our clients, I am doing writing and design for their fundraising and strategic planning efforts. And I would totally listen to 92,000 Hours, even if I wasn't working on it. I think my initial hook probably would have been that we often interview people who I actually know. And I would have been like, oh, I would love to hear from that person. But just generally, I love I love this idea of it being experts next door, just people who we know and who we interact with every day, but they are also these fountains of wisdom if we just take the time to sit down and listen to them. So I would have probably gotten hooked by knowing one of the people interviewed and then continued listening because all of the conversations are so enlightening.
I love that so much. I feel the same way in terms of like listening to the fact that we don't often have famous people, but you can listen to people with such wisdom who are right by you. They're sitting in the cubicle near you, or they're right down the street, or they're a phone call away if you just engage in like some of those really interesting conversations and ask them honestly curious questions. So clearly we all know that I would listen to 92,000 hours, and we kind of know that this is a passion project for me and it makes me happy all the days. So clearly this is why I want to do it, because it gives me an excuse to call up those people who I consider to be experts next door and ask them the types of questions that I normally wouldn't be able to ask them. So I want to try having more of those conversations in my life generally, without recording them, so that I can have these engagements with people. But to get to this, now, we all know that the purpose of the 92,000 Hours podcast is really because we're focused on how we spend those 92,000 hours well, rather than just having them be spent. We know that time is our most finite resource. We know that so many of us, we're all doing that whole, what's the quest? What's the purpose for me being here? So having that out there as part of what we are interested in talking to people about, and then using these subject matters to get to it, has been really fun for me. Has it helped you guys during this season to actually think about what is meaningful for you in a job? In what way? Like, is there any conversation that you're like, oh, that was something that made me think this job sounds cool?
Yeah, I feel like for me, the biggest takeaway that I've personally taken from this season is that every single opportunity and every single job is an opportunity for you to make it meaningful. And I think the story that I was telling myself in my last few jobs was that, oh, this isn't the right job for me. So I'm just going to check out emotionally, mentally, whatever. And I'm just going to clock on, do whatever, clock out, and that's it. Right. And I feel like through listening to our season, it made me realize that that's actually a very like lazy, easy way to just let yourself go about doing a career, because I think that the real challenge that ultimately is really rewarding is if you actually try to make each moment meaningful, and if you like really look for all the ways in which you can connect or the ways that you can express your gifts a little more. So yeah.
So what do you think about the theme of the season? The fact that we're focusing on change makers. What did that mean to you? And did it make sense with some of the people that we interviewed? What do you think, Lexi?
So when you said we're gonna do change makers this season and interviewing a lot of people who are in like fundraising and impact roles, I could see how it related, obviously, to like what we're doing as a business in our fundraising and strategic planning consulting. But I was a little skeptical because I was like, really? We're going to go from interviewing everyday people to doing an entire season just on fundraisers and call it a fancier word as change makers. But as I was listening to it, I'm like, they still are the experts next door. They're people who are all in your network. You might not have even worked with them. They're also your friends. And it helped me realize that change makers are all around us, and that even we ourselves can be change makers in our work, in our personal lives, just through small actions that we commit to every single day. And that if we look closely, we probably already are change makers in our lives. And it was really inspiring to me in the end, because they're all really courageous and innovating the way that they're approaching their work, no matter what industry they're in. And yeah, as I said, it's just that I don't need to do some grand gestures or make a political revolution to be a change maker. I just need to take small steps every day and in every interaction that contribute to the greater good. And that was a really powerful lesson.
Oh, I love that we're going to contribute to the greater good just by, sometimes it just is like showing up, right? Sarah, what did you think about the theme of the season?
Yeah, I feel like for me, just because I am not super familiar with the fundraising philanthropic world, I feel like all of our guests this season really changed my perception of what it means to show up to work. and what it means to show up to work with intention. And even though I know intention was the last theme that we explored with Dale, I feel like that theme was present for each and every episode. And yeah, I feel like I really walked away with a deeper understanding of how we can infuse intention in every aspect of our jobs.
I love it. So let's dig in. I would love to hear from you guys talking to me however you want to talk about any one of the guests. Like what, I don't want to go, one by one through each guest, but we heard from many people this season who had something interesting to say. So, and we all come from different backgrounds. So what was something interesting that you heard from someone? What story resonated with you? What did you get out of this season that you think is something that you're going to hold with you? And give me a few. Like let's have a conversation about what we liked.
I loved in the first episode, and I think this really stayed with me through the whole season, when Jim Langley said, "We're all just walking stories wanting to be heard."
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, it still gives me chills when I'm the one repeating it. It's not even my phrase, but it was so good. And I think that came out in a lot of interviews, that every person has a story, and one of the greatest gifts that we can give is to sit down and listen to it and then treat them with the worth and dignity that they deserve.
I love that. I like, oh my gosh. It has everything to do with Jim talking about how you speak to donors, but it also has everything to do with how we walk around in our everyday lives and how we think about what it's like to stand next to somebody at the grocery store checkout. That person is a walking story and has really interesting things happening in their lives that we have no idea about just standing next to them. That if we had a moment, I bet we could have something sublime could potentially happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like, to go off of that, I was really inspired by the openness that Sean had towards the world and just like everyone he works with. And I feel like approaching life with that sense of openness and just having this possibility in your mind that this person in front of you has something really interesting to contribute. I feel like it's something that I am now trying to incorporate in my own interactions. And I feel like I've already, I don't know, it's just made like life a lot more rich and interesting.
I have to give it to Sean too, because I've known Sean for a while, and it is true. Like he is like part of the story is just showing up makes a difference, right? But for Sean, yes, he's going to show up and he's going to be fully present. He is there. He is with you. Um, and even in the past, I remember once I you'll be shocked, but I met with him for coffee once years ago, and I was about to talk poorly about a politician, and he had no place for it. He didn't say to me like, "Don't you dare," but he did he just pivoted into something positive. It was really fascinating to like Sean is true about he can find good things in everyone and sees and engages with them authentically with excitement. Super inspiring to see someone like that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Who else inspired you during this season?
I mean, every single one of them, but I was just thinking about how almost every single one of the interviews mentioned something about curiosity. Like Mark Shreve said that curiosity is the secret weapon of people who are good at connecting. And back to Sean, he said that if you're curious about the world, you're never going to stop learning. Life is just going to be a continuous process of learning. And I think that is one of the things that I really value in myself and in other people, is curiosity and asking good questions and really listening to the answer with the intent to learn about the person and more about the world. And I love that that came through this season.
Who what resonated with you? What quotes were you like, oh my gosh, besides the couple that you just mentioned? Was there anyone else that you were like, that was so good?
Yeah, so for me, it would be my name twin, Sarah. We're actually both Sarah D's, which is great. But what I loved about her episode is I feel like she really grounds the idea of what optimism can be. And I think a lot of times optimism can be conflated with toxic positivity or delusion, which you two unpack in the episode. But Sarah describes optimism as thinking about the future in a way that feels achievable. And yeah, I feel like it just totally shifted things for me because I've just been in a phase in my life where I find myself feeling like I have to be overtly rational about things. And when you're in that space, it can feel like there's no room to be optimistic because you're just like, oh, well, because of the way that things look right now in the present moment, like, why would it make for that? Right. But I think that when you can let yourself be optimistic about the fact that you can achieve wherever you want to get to, um, I don't know, it's just really, it's just been very helpful for me.
I agree. What do you think, Lexi?
Yeah, I really enjoyed Sarah's episode. It was a good one. One of the things she talked about that again was a big theme in a lot of the interviews was about self-awareness. And she says that self-awareness is one of the most important traits that people can have. And if you're self-aware, or at least willing to be self-aware, then anything is possible. And that really resonated with me.
I'm also really interested if we want to take a look at some of the themes. It's funny because this season, when I reached out to the people that we interviewed, I provided them with, like, I would say, we'll focus on a subject. It could be something like, so I did have things like trust and connection or engagement or integrity or connection. Like I had some of those, but then you can hear some others that people came back to me and said, actually, I'd really like to talk about. And so what was interesting to me is I threw out some ideas and then people came back to me with others. And so what do you think about those ones? And those ones are Felicia with subtle radicalism. What did you think about that conversation and that, like, that as an act of change making?
So powerful. Yeah, I loved that. And her interview was so good. And I think I mentioned this in like the first question that we talked about because it was so profound for me that she talks all about how subtle actions and just small acts of kindness, even something as simple as sitting down with someone for coffee and listening to their story, can change the world or can change someone's life. And I'm going to carry that one with me and try to be more intentional about just listening to people and giving them the time and showing them that I find them worthy of my time and attention.
What about then we had Gary Dane saying, I would like to talk about devotion. I mean, what a word, by the way. When he said that to me, I was like, devotion. I hadn't even thought about using the term devotion when it came to my work, right? I hadn't even thought about it. What do you guys think about that conversation that we had with Gary?
Yeah, it's really interesting because in my own life, I have swapped out the word discipline for the word devotion in terms of just trying to ground myself into my daily practice, trying to be more productive, etc. And just reframing the idea of, okay, I am now devoted to this thing as opposed to I need to be disciplined about this thing has made me more excited about doing it. And it's made me more excited about life in general.
I wanted to find the definition. I was just looking right now to look at the definition that Gary had about
I've got it.
devotion.
Don't worry.
Ooh, go
Yeah,
like
My
okay,
big
tell
book
me.
of quotes here.
All right.
Devotion, love entangled with commitment.
oh wow.
Love entangled with commitment. And I
I
love
want to like just sit with that for a minute because he's talked about it in the podcast. For me, when he talked about it with like both the positive side of that, but also the shadow side of it too. Like sometimes our devotion to a place or a relationship or a cause can be too entangled with, like, you might have commitment to it when you need to walk away, like there's a part of it that I found super interesting. I also found it very interesting that as he talked about where he had seen devotion, he generally and most often saw it more in like in terms of like the unsung heroes of a place rather than the named leaders. What did you think about that? Like that stayed with me.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of my big takeaways from his, is that often the people who are most devoted, who are the people we might consider the heart and soul of the organization, they're not the people with power and authority. They're not the people in those leadership positions, but they are the heart and soul of the organization. And if you took them away, it just wouldn't be the same experience. And I was also interested in his point that you can be devoted to the work itself, even if it's just to answering the phones. And you're like, I'm going to make sure that every phone call gets answered and then that person feels like they got the service that they needed, not necessarily to the organization. So there are all these different ways that you can be devoted in your role.
Annalisa, did it bring anything out of you specifically, just in terms of thinking about your relationship to devotion and work?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I felt like he was talking to me. It was really hard for me actually in the conversation where I was like, this helps me to understand how I felt like the idea of devotion to a place of work, to a theme of work, helped me understand how I had gotten so confused about my own personal identity and the work that I had done in my past, right? Like where after leaving a place, it took me so long to figure out who I was. And I think it was from my devotion. And I do think like I'd had other people who had engaged with me at that workplace who would say like that I had heart and soul pieces to myself about that. Like, I can't imagine that place without you. And then I was gone, and that place is fine, and it's still going to be fine. It's not about me. But I had gotten like kind of I felt like he was talking to me in that moment, and he wasn't, but that's the point of a podcast, right? Is like, oh, that part resonated with me, but from both the positive aspect as well as the shadow side. Like it really was good for me to hear.
Mm. So now that that part is gone and it's in that chapter of your life, what would you say is left?
Now I have I have this honestly, I have the scars of having overcome, like it was hard and I was confused for a long time. Um, but now what I have left is the really valid and really important and authentic relationships with real people that came from that time. That when I put my whole self and my all into that work that I did and was like super vulnerable, I was like me, this is who I am. I wasn't professional me or like I was just this is who I'm fully me. Um, I got to meet people who were also fully them, and I still have great relationships with many of them, including Gary, including Lexi. Like they came from that time. So that's the really positive part of that devotion because the love and commitment was real. It just makes it really hard when you have to leave.
That word entangled in Gary's quote
Yes,
really
it's
captures your
true.
experience there.
And he did it on purpose. Like like the part where you can't tell. I asked him about it and he was like, entangled for me, like entangled feels like how you would talk about lovers, right? Like entangled or how you would talk about like it's really emotional, that word. There's no like you even if you're like entangled in a fight with someone, it's like you're in it, you know? And so I think he chose the word purposefully because of that. Like you can't tell where one thing starts and one thing ends. It's all mixed in. So interesting.
So since we already have you on the spot a little bit, can I ask you
Ah,
a question? And we can also return to it later if that's easier. Um, one of the things that I was remembering from this season was that there were a lot of little tips and stories that came out about parenthood. And since you're the only parent actually here, I was wondering what you learned. Like, There was Caitlin Brazil talking about how she talks about dignity with her children,
Oh,
and Sean talking about their 30-minute games. Was there anything about parenting that you took from this season?
always. I think that I take I there's a conversation in almost every single one of our episodes where either I see something related to how I'm parenting my kids, or they tell me something that I think, wow, I wish I would have known that 15 years ago. That I think, oh, that was so good. And often it's not even necessarily when they're talking about being a parent. Sometimes it's about how they have difficult conversations, or um sometimes it's about like being all in and being present. Like, oh my gosh, how often do we as parents not do that, where we're trying to think about the other thing that has to happen next and the kid just wants us to listen to the joke, or what, like, to just be in the moment. So and the moments are fleeting. So I took away so much. I took away from one of them, like when Felicia, she talked a little bit about being a child, when and her and after her dad died, and like learning more about what it's um, like to learn more about your family. I like to know that your parents have a whole part of them that they're not sharing with you is also like really interesting revelation. That what I think is interesting about that is all of those things that happen in our personal lives. It's one of the reasons why we talk about 92,000 hours and finding meaning and purpose, because we bring our whole selves to work. And I feel like you can't pretend that you're not. Like when we say like work and home, there's no such thing in my opinion, because the stuff that happens in your home always affects your life. It's just one life. And so allowing people to be fully themselves at work, I think, is important. It makes it more full, and also, you know, allows us to sit with our humanity a little and be kind to each other when we need to be.
Mhm.
Um, let's talk a little bit about some of the others that were interesting. Like we had subtle radicalism, devotion, but let's like dignity. That was fascinating. That Caitlin was like, I want to talk about dignity. I, of course, was thrilled, but um, I love that she said that, and I'm shocked at myself for having never thought of that as one of our subjects. Like, gosh, I wish that I was that smart, and I wasn't.
I
How
loved
did
her
dignity resonate?
point about how sometimes treating someone with dignity means disagreeing with them. Sometimes it means having the difficult conversation, because I'm fairly non-confrontational, and that challenged me because it goes against my natural inclinations. But if we want to be kind to someone, if we want to treat them in the way that they deserve, sometimes we do have to disagree.
So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. And I think for me, it made me think about how we all probably have different definitions of what dignity means for us and what it means to treat someone with dignity. And for me, I feel more open to receiving everyone's different ways of showing dignity, or showing me that they think I'm worthy of dignity, and also doing the same like from my end. And I think I'm saying this because I just met my boyfriend's mom for the first time, and it went great, but there are like cultural differences, right? And I realized that like the ways that I was approaching her and like the ways that I wanted to show her that I was treating her with dignity might not translate in the same way, because of how she perceives it, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I don't know, I thought that was interesting. Like, do you guys feel like you have different definitions of dignity, or what is your definition of treating someone with dignity?
Mhm.
That's so good, because I honestly don't know. I love Caitlin talking about dignity. And I've been thinking about dignity a lot lately, because I've been thinking about this work that I'm doing with a client right now that is about when your whole, like, so I've been using the word dignity in terms of like if your whole life is upside down, and it's an educational institution. So when we're talking about providing education to people who are refugees, who are in war-torn countries, who have lost everything, I've been thinking about what education can provide, even if it's the ability to sit down and read a book, or if it's the ability to have the dignity of a life of the mind feels like something that I want to help give to everyone, right? Like that, like even when there's nothing that we can provide you that's going to make your child feel safe or be back in their house, you can have this moment of inside your head, there's some safety and there's some knowledge that you know something, right? Like that you're making a forward progression, even if it's just happening here before it can happen externally. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about in terms of dignity, which is not a definition, but it's a way that I'm putting that word to action right now.
It's interesting because I think of this question in the way, like Annalisa tells this story that often in our mentoring groups at one of the universities we used to work for, when we asked students about belonging, they talked about times when they didn't belong. So when I think about dignity, think about times when I wasn't treated with dignity. And the closest thing to a definition I've come to in the couple of minutes since you asked the question is that dignity is recognizing that someone has inherent worth, and because they have inherent worth, they have a right to self-determination to determine their own lives.
So well done. Very well said.
And that kind of links back to something Caitlin said in her interview, which is that one of the best ways to give people dignity is to treat them as experts in their own lives and empower them to make big decisions that impact their lives.
I had a faculty member when I was in my PhD program that I never finished, who wrote a book about dignity, and it was founded in her experiences of racism as a Black woman in Europe, where people had said, like, I don't know that she's like, yes, there is racism in Europe. And so like she was talking about the way that we treat people without dignity as here's what it's not. So let's talk about now, what is it, right? I like that. I mean, it was pretty fun when Caitlin was talking about dignity in the interview. And then I was able to tell her, like, I know exactly who you're talking about, who spoke about dignity, because they're one of our clients. It's amazing. What a small world.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one of the people that we just haven't like yet talked much about, because we have a couple, and oh my gosh, can I just tell you, we interviewed Mark Shreve about connection, and it is so on brand for Mark Shreve that after the interview, he has connected with me to say, like, how can I help refer you to more people? I want to make sure that I'm part of your network. And then I don't think he even talked about it much in his podcast, but he has a new baby at home. So I'm so excited for him.
Well, to use his own words, you have to give a damn. He gives a damn about you, Annalisa. That's why he's making all these connections for you.
I think it's so hard too, right? To give a damn about that many people. Like, how do we define connection in ways where we can actually show up for people? I don't know. It's one of those, it's really interesting thought for me to give a damn enough and to know when it's appropriate. Like, you could run yourself ragged trying to give a damn about all the people that you could be helping, because there's a lot. So identifying that, I think, is important. And I feel lucky that Mark seems to have done that with me.
Yeah. I feel like for me, what like on the topic of giving a damn and just this whole podcast season in general has really made me think about how I feel like sometimes we can try to create this disconnect between work and the rest of our lives. And it goes back to this idea, Annalisa, that you were talking about, how it's all just one life. And I was thinking about how, like, in each day of our work lives, we're interacting with another human being. We're infusing energy or something into that interaction that is going to impact them in some way. We're creating an experience for them, we're creating memories for them that might impact their psyche in some way or their mood or whatever. And there's that Ram Dass quote that's we're all just walking each other home at the end of the day. And I feel like that's how I feel when I think about this idea of giving a damn, which is, yeah, maybe this person that you're having a very quick chat about deliverables or something, maybe you don't actually care about that person as much as you care about your best friend or your partner. But at the end of the day, that's another human being that's sitting right in front of you. And that's an opportunity for you to create a moment that could be really beautiful and leave a really lasting impression. Because you don't know what they might need out of that conversation or what you might be able to give. So yeah, I'm very grateful for this season for really just like helping me connect that. And I'm currently looking for new jobs now, and I feel like I have this renewed sense of excitement about what I can bring into the workforce and into my next job, and just like approaching it with more intentionality.
It's a good segue. Should we talk about intention? We haven't talked about Dale and he's one that came up with intention, that he wanted to have that as the focus. What did you think about his podcast?
So good. He's so wise. Yeah. One of my favorite parts of his interview is when he said, if you decide where you want to be, what you want to be, how you want to be, your subconscious will take you there. And you might need to kind of course correct and redirect and get people back on the ship, but subconsciously you're going to be moving in that direction and attracting what you need in order to bring that into the reality. Yeah. And then the idea that intention requires a vision and requires clarity in how you're going to get there. And you might, again, need to change that plan, but you can't just think, oh, well, this is a beautiful idea with no plan on how to execute it.
Yeah, with no effort. Yeah. The Dale interview, of course, was like so good for me. So I am like it. There's points of that which I'm now embarrassed because Lexi's pointed out to me, but like I got a little verklempt during verklempt because when he talked about his what he was most proud of, and it was about those mentoring moments where he has like people, and he said this thing about it where he said like sometimes people come into your life and you know they're going to be in your life, like it's not for a moment, you're like I'm gonna know that person, and then after the podcast was over he said you're one of those people with me, you know. And I was like, oh. What? That's amazing. But I had also made that, like in some ways, that was intention from me because I had been at a conference with him and I walked up to him and said, you may not know this, but you're one of my mentors. And I'm not even asking you to be my mentor. I'm just telling you that you already are because I'm paying attention to you and listening to the things you say. So that leads me to I had one of the questions for you guys, which were there any laugh out loud moments or shed a tear moments for you during this season?
It's funny you being verklempt, because I was gonna say we should create a 92,000 hours drinking game where it's take a shot every time Annalisa says something has made her weepy.
Weepy.
Oh my gosh, did you guys talk about this together in advance?
No,
Oh
you
my
just say it I'm not kidding. I think you said it in every single episode this season. So that was a laugh out loud moment for me as I was editing.
Gosh,
There
I'm
was
so
one, she didn't say it. I went and looked, don't
Oh,
worry.
okay.
And
There was one?
interestingly, yeah, it was Dignity with Caitlin Brazil. You didn't get weepy. And that was one I thought maybe you'd get weepy. You were too excited because of the whole dignity topic. But I will say, even though I laughed at it, um,
I'm
I
gonna
also think
watch
it's
my
really
words
beautiful.
now. I got to make sure I don't say that anymore. How embarrassing.
No, I think it's beautiful that you are so moved by things that it literally brings tears to your eyes and that you just come out and say it and how authentic and vulnerable that is to say that in this, I mean, this is a work conversation for you, even if you get a lot of joy out of it, to say in this environment, like, oh my gosh, I'm emotional right now. I think that's beautiful and something that I don't see very often. And I think in the times when I do it, it's often because I've seen your example of doing that so many times that I've learned it from you.
Aw, yay. Hopefully it works out well for you and people don't just wonder. Because, I have had, I actually feel a little nervous about it because I have heard of folks who get weepy and people tease them. Like, like it's not real, like it's inauthentic, like it's an act. And I don't want to ever come across that way at all. And so I'm a little bit worried about it right now because I'm seeing that as like a thread that I'm seeing on my own social media right now. So I don't want to be that person, but
Yeah,
I
but
really do feel it when I'm saying I really am.
yeah, I was gonna say, and that says more about them that they're being dismissive about someone's very real emotions. That's how you're gonna react. Like, come on,
Yeah.
do better.
um, but there were good moments, right? Where people say things like, and you're taking away some of the quotes, but sometimes for me, it's like I get these moments where I'm like, oh, I think I get weepy either because what they said seems so profound and I want to actually like, cuddle that for a minute. I want to like separate it out and say like, let's remember this is what you just said was meaningful. Or it it hit me in a way that I was like, oh, that affects me. Like that's, you just said that to me and I hear it and I should take that to heart. And now I'm feeling something about it.
Mhm.
Actually, just in this conversation, it happened while we were talking because I was thinking about that. Like the big picture of this season for me, and I probably said this story in one of the episodes because it's one of my stories. So I apologize. But it's that whole like um so I remember going to a um uh lecture that was not enough people were there at it, but it was with I've told the story with Sister Helen Prejean, and she's wrote Dead Man Walking. I have her signed copy of her book here at my house because I got it from her that day. But she's like, it's so simple, but she has the story and the meaning behind it where she says like your honest presence, like that's sitting and giving someone the gift of your presence of really being there, um whether it's, and it's just listening to their walking story. If you just honest to goodness listen to someone's story, it's the best gift you can ever give someone, and she knows it because she gave it to people who were on death row, and that's all they wanted was someone to hear them before they died. Like that's all we want, right? Is someone to sit down and just be with us and hear our story.
Wow, and it's so easy to give too. It really
Yeah.
is hard to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like each one of our guests this season as change makers um, brought some aspect of that to it, whether it was the Jim talking about trust then and holding someone's story with trust, or Kyle talking about integrity and having integrity with what you say you'll do and then doing it, like um to whatever, like each person had some aspect of that. that I feel like it combined that presence and really honoring the people that they're with. In the end, it all comes down to humans and people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Were there any funny moments? Hard to know, huh? Well, there'll be the bloopers we have of you guys losing your train of thought.
Yeah.
We should do a reel of me saying that makes me so weepy. That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on it. I'll have a lot of fun with that. Well, I mean, I can't really recall exactly what made me laugh. I'm sure there were things throughout the season, but the stories that made me weepy actually were often your stories, Annalisa, even though a lot of them I've heard already. But like you talking about how your mom said that you need to get an education because an education meant freedom, and not just like freedom to leave for a PTA meeting, but the freedom to leave your job if they weren't treating you with dignity, the freedom to leave a relationship if you need to. That was really powerful. And I can totally see Peggy saying that. And, or the story where your daughter, I imagine it was Charlotte, was blown away by that big gust of wind, not literally blown away, but she was like, wow, mama, because it was such an amazing gust of wind. And that was just so special and a good reminder to see the magic in mundane moments.
Or the story of the boyfriend that I never had because of my friend. Like, did you hear the one in the intention episode where I said like, yeah, I
Yeah.
realized over time that I wasn't attracted to him because he just let life happen to him. I didn't have a way to explain it, but he wasn't living with any intention. It was just, I feel like he was being buffeted around by whatever wind blew one way or the other. And I was like, that I just decided is unattractive. I can't.
Gave you the ick.
Gave me the ick. That totally gives me the ick. Yep. You don't even have to have a big plan. You just have to have some intention, right? Like, yeah. You have
That
to,
made me laugh when you were like, shout out if you're listening to this.
I know.
You're a great guy.
Still a great guy. Just work for me. This has been fun for me, like this season, because my mom lives with me and has been listening to this season as each episode comes out. And she comes in, she's in our backyard listening, and then she'll come in as if I've been listening to the same thing as she has. So she'll just like be in conversation with me, and I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? And one of my funny moments for her was just recently, she listened to Sean, and she comes in and she's like, "Ooh, I need to go lay down. That man makes me kind of tired. He is just there." So I thought I would tease Sean about that a little bit, that he made my mom was like, wow, he is like, when he's talking that he is engaged, he's engaged. I felt it through the podcast. It was funny.
True.
So when you think about these, is there anything that you wish that you knew a little more about after you heard it? Is there anything you're going to follow up on?
I don't know about follow up on, but I want to know how these people stay so motivated with the current state of the world. Like there is so much going on and it's so heavy, and yet they still get up every day and work toward a better world, not knowing what the real state of the world is going to be even like a year from now, but they still put their whole heart and soul into it. And how do they keep themselves motivated to do that? Because sometimes I'm disenchanted.
I wonder if there's some aspect of that there is something to the work that is in mission-driven organizations that are so mission-driven in that way that might, but like clearly, I think aligns and speaks to the values of the people that we interviewed. Like I feel like they found places that matched who they were, so it made it easier for them to get up in the morning and do the thing.
Mhm. well, this was the other side of my question is how do you balance that? Because all these people clearly love their work so much. How do they not just lose themselves in that? How do they put down this important work that they're doing to go like change the baby's diaper? I know you have to take care of a baby, so that's a bad example, but like literally dealing with something crappy. Instead, you could be dedicating your time to this work. So how do you maintain that balance?
That's a good question that it would be an interesting one to follow up with each of them. To say like, here's some questions that people asked and we'd love to know your feedback, and we could put it as a blog or something. Like, here's some things that we'd love to know as a follow-up that we got questions. Shout out to any listeners. If you have a question, we'll go back and ask them.
Yeah, let us know. I feel like for me, I would just want to ask each of them, how did you find a job that you love? Like, how did it happen? What were the steps you took? Let me know so I can do it.
I think that's right. Sarah, I think that there's some real truth to the quarter life crisis thing of, okay, who am I going to be and how am I going to live my life?
Yeah. I feel
Lexi,
very-
you
Oh, sorry.
experienced some of that too.
Oh, yeah. I have gone through so many different identities and plans and found fulfillment and lack of fulfillment in so many of them. And I guess that's kind of similar to another question I would want to ask them, which is like, tell us about a time where you just like completely pivoted your life and went in a different direction. And how did that go? Like, when you became the change maker of your own life and your own destiny, when you took the reins, how did that go?
That's a good one.
But
You think of your own life.
my current idea of like my dream job and what would fulfill me is completely different than it was 10 years ago. And I'm sure it'll be completely different in 10 years again. And I am just going with the flow.
That's beautiful, Lexi, because I feel like a lot of people don't even allow themselves to get there. Like they don't allow themselves to change and to take the leap because it feels so scary because they're like, oh, well, gotta get my pension. I've been doing this for the last 4 decades. What else am I going to do? Whatever. But it's really cool that you're letting yourself just sort of step into the unknown and seeing what awaits you on the other side.
It's that intention. You're drawing toward you the things that clearly matter. I remember when I was leaving my work as an attorney, one of the things I found, and oh my gosh, I moved recently. So I found a box that had my journal from back then.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
to see what I was saying back when I was in my, late 20s and having my giant crisis of like, who am I going to be? And it was when I was leaving the law, about to start work at Westminster. And I had this list that I legitimately wrote down to help remind me of things that I loved. And
Wow.
and the things that I loved, I mean, I really wrote down like places where I don't feel safe. I wrote that down and I said, at the time, I said my work. I didn't feel safe at my work. I didn't like where I was working. I didn't feel like I could just be. And so I wrote it down and I was like, then why am I there? If I'm not like comfortable, what am I doing? This is not a way to live. But I saw this thing that said, at the time, because I was a single mom at the time, and it said places where I feel safe. And it said, home or wherever Bree is, love, 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 love. Oh,
Oh.
isn't that lovely? It was good. So if we get those people also in our lives that make us feel safe, and I think every now and then you'll meet one of them, I think, at work. Like that little moment where Dale said, like, there are people that you go, I'm going to know you. Every now and then you'll meet one of those people at work, that you're going to know, and that they're going to hold you, like hold you, not like hold you, but, hold you so that you have a safety container with them too, which is nice. So what are we going to do for the next thing? What's the plan? What are we going to do? What's interesting about either the world or about conversations that we're having, that if you were to think like, I want to listen to a future podcast from the 92,000 hours people, what would it be?
I would personally love to hear more about authenticity and just letting yourself be your full authentic self at work, which this podcast does. But I feel like it's something, Annalisa, that you could really dive into um, even more. And I say that because it's a question I'm asking myself all the time. And when I reflect on my career, I think it's the one thing that I would go back and change. I'm not a believer in regrets, but if I were to do things differently, I would have just let myself be my full self in every single professional situation without feeling like I had to mold or adapt my energy to fit, someone else, etc. So yeah, I think that could be really helpful for people who are still navigating it like I am.
Well, I think that authenticity first requires self-awareness, and we did a lot of really good work around self-awareness in our workshop series in the last season, but maybe returning to some of those questions and themes that we explored in that season and doing interviews around them and talking to people about like, okay, let's talk about your identity. How did your identity change throughout your life? How did your identity show up in different areas of your life? Let's talk about your fears, like going back to those topics, but in interview format, because I really love hearing people's stories.
I agree. It might be fun to do our the workshop series in an actual workshop with like 3 or 4 people who would be that brave to let it be on a podcast. Because that's like hard work to do that. That work is hard to do.
Another one that could be interesting is like the people in Sarah's situation where they're trying to figure out their dream job and their place in the world and interviewing them about their process and how it's going and how they're failing and where they end up. It could be kind of cool.
I agree that it's not that it's to show that it's okay that you don't know too. Like that it's not, and there's not I bet you'll find out, Sarah, as you think about it, that there's no like one size fits all path either. Like
Yeah.
otherwise somebody would have patented that and given it to all of us by now. Well, I want to say thanks to both of you for doing this work on this podcast this season. And of course, I loved it. I love that one of the places where I feel safe is in the container that both of you create here on this podcast, where I know that not only what I say is going to be taken with care and consideration by each of you as you're going through this and either creating what we put up on social media or what goes out on the podcast itself, but that you're doing that not just for me, but also for our guests. I can feel totally comfortable that you'll make sure that they're treated with respect and care as well. So thank you for doing that. It's really important. And it makes us have the reputation that we have in terms of caring for our guests and treating them well. So before we go, I can't help myself. I didn't even prep you for this. And I'm going to do the first question that I ask people. And that's what we're going to end on this time.
Oh boy.
So it's good because I'm going to ask it to you like the way I would with students when I interviewed them and didn't give them time to think about, which is if you take away school, work, volunteerism, sports, church activities, all those things that you do, what are you proud about yourself? What are you most proud of about yourself as a human being? All right, Lexi, you go first.
I would say I'm most proud of my adaptability and ability and willingness to let go of the places, people, ways of thinking, ways of being that are no longer serving me. I definitely never expected that I would end up doing what I'm doing or being where I am in this life. And I'm proud that I have the confidence in myself and my own, as I said, adaptability and abilities to forge my own path and find my own definition of success. Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Love it. Sarah, how about you?
It's actually really similar to Lexi's. I'm really proud of how much I've let myself change throughout my 26 years of life. And that hasn't always been the easiest thing because I've always found a lot of comfort and security and having a very strong, established sense of identity. And so as life happened and as I entered different chapters, those identities that I'd constructed for myself quickly fell away. And I'm really proud of the fact that I let them and that I just kept going and created space for new ones to emerge.
Awesome. Yay, it's a fulfilling life.
Annalisa, what about you?
Oh, you
Ah,
have to answer. Come on. I don't think I've ever heard your answer,
I was
which I
gonna
just
say, we've
realized.
never. Yeah.
I think my answer changes, and that's an interesting thing that I think it can change over time. Um, I think right now I have similar I have both. Like I have a similar, I'm really proud of my ability to have faith in myself right now. Like that's new. That's a new thing for me where I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to leap and trust that I've got this. And that I did a lot of that this year and I'm really proud of it because I have to choose to keep doing it every day and it's also really worth it. And I think that the other thing I'm like really proud of is um some of these, like the relationships, they are few really, but they're really powerful. Like to know, and I always tell people this, like to know that you have a handful of really good, strong relationships in your life, the people who like love you no matter what, those are those are I'm really proud of those, because you have to also choose those every day. You have to get through hard stuff, and you have to have, like what we talked about earlier, you have to have the difficult conversations in order for those to be there, and you have to continue to invest in them even when, like, you've let them down or they've let you down, but you still have to show up instead of run away, right? Like, it's good, and, I feel really good about that, and I'm also personally really proud of how well, right now, I'm learning to handle and respond to and support my youngest kid as they are thinking about who they are in the world. I think that I'm showing up for that okay. I don't know if I'm doing it well, but I'm choosing to show up for it every day as well as I can. So there we go. That's a lot of them. I'm feeling good right now. Huh?
You're a little prideful over there,
Yeah,
Emily.
gosh. Tomorrow I'll fall down at it. So whatever. Thanks you guys for doing this podcast. This has been really fun.
Hey everyone, we hope you really liked this episode, and I want to thank Lexi Banks and Sarah Doe for their incredible work on everything we do with 92,000 hours. They are the backbone of our efforts. They make all of us sound good, and as you can hear them in this episode, they are paying attention and listening and finding the great nuggets of information that makes sense to share even more widely. You can follow both of them on LinkedIn, and I encourage you to do so. You can learn more about them at our website, www.connectioncollaborative.com. That's the end of our season. I'm filming this at the reflection pool at my local botanical garden because it is great to take a moment to reflect, not just on everything we learned, whether it was from trust to engagement, connection, dignity, subtle radicalism, optimism, integrity, devotion, intention. So many incredible things that we've learned from incredible human beings whom I call the experts next door. We hope you enjoyed the season. We hope you continue to listen. And as you reflect on what you learned, please reach out to us so we can determine what we should focus on next season. Thanks, everyone.